Welcome to my channel where we tell stories of the most epic moments in human history. And this is one of the most insane ones we've ever heard. This story comes from World War II, specifically the Battle of Grote. But we will not be focusing on the Nazis or the Soviets, but instead a tiny platoon of Polish Home Army soldiers who found themselves fighting an entire German division. We don't know many details about these men, like their names, their backgrounds, or even how many men were in this platoon. All we have are the accounts of the villagers whose lives they saved and the reports of the German officers who fought against them. And what we do know is truly mind-blowing. It was the summer of 1944. By this point, Nazi Germany had been pushed back all across the Eastern Front, and it seemed that the Allies were winning. But in reality, they still had one more push left in them. Their plan was called Operation Bagration, and it would turn the tide of war in favor of the Allies forever. But that's going to take some time, so if you want to see the final defeat of Nazi Germany, you're going to have to subscribe and wait a little bit. Back to our story. This group of Polish resistance fighters were part of the Home Army, also known as the Armia Krajowa, which was a secret organization created by the Polish government in exile with the goal of liberating Poland from Nazi occupation. They launched a series of uprisings against the Germans all across the country, but this particular platoon was stationed in a village called Grote when the German army started pushing towards them. When the Germans got close enough, the platoon knew they had to act. If they wanted to defend their country, they would need to hold Grote at all costs. But there was a problem. The village was full of terrified civilians. Homes were being bombed and burnt. People were screaming and running around, trying to escape the chaos while the German tanks rumbled closer and closer. Our platoon had only one mission: evacuate as many civilians as possible. As soon as the fighting started, they dropped their weapons and ran into the streets. What followed was an absolute miracle. The Home Army soldiers acted so bravely and decisively that they actually managed to herd thousands of frightened civilians into the church and the nearby forest. There they stayed until the fighting was over. But how did the Home Army manage to achieve this? The answer might surprise you. It wasn't military tactics or superior firepower. It was something much simpler and more powerful: sheer willpower. While the Germans were focused on destroying the Polish resistance, they never expected such fierce resistance from these ordinary citizens. In fact, German commanders were so shocked by the bravery of the Polish people that they wrote detailed reports about it. In one such report, German Major Karl von der Leyen described how he and his men were caught off guard by the sudden appearance of armed resistance. He had expected the Polish Home Army to flee once the fighting began, but instead they stood their ground and fought back. "It was a real shock for us," says the major, and his men responded to this unexpected resistance with brutal force. Homes were bombed and burned, and people were killed. But the Polish Home Army soldiers kept fighting. Despite being heavily outnumbered and outgunned, they refused to give up. German Captain Wilhelm Worms also wrote a report about the battle, and he too was impressed by the bravery of the Polish people. The resistance put up a good fight, he said, and he even admitted that they posed a real threat to his men. However, he also claimed that they would have lost anyway, since they were facing a superior German force. The question is, why didn't they just run away? Why did they stay and fight? One reason could be loyalty to their country and their cause. For these Polish Home Army soldiers, defending Grote wasn't just about protecting civilians. It was also about striking a blow against the Nazi war machine. Even if they knew they couldn't win, they were willing to sacrifice everything to defend their homeland. Another reason could be desperation. With the German army bearing down on them, the Polish Home Army soldiers knew that there was no easy way out. If they tried to flee, they would likely be killed or captured, so they might as well have stayed and fought. Whatever the reason, the Polish Home Army soldiers displayed incredible courage and determination. They refused to let the Germans take Grote without a fight. And they managed to hold off the German advance for several days. Now, I'm sure you're wondering what happened in the end. Did the Germans eventually capture the village? Well, the answer is both yes and no. On one hand, the German army did eventually capture Groth. But on the other hand, the Polish Home Army soldiers achieved their main objective of evacuating the civilians. You see, despite the intense fighting and the constant danger, the Polish Home Army soldiers managed to get most of the villagers out of harm's way. They organized a system of underground tunnels and safe houses where people could hide from the fighting. And when the fighting was at its most intense, they personally escorted many villagers to safety. This is perhaps best exemplified by the actions of one Polish Home Army soldier named Witold Pilecki. When the fighting broke out, he immediately set about evacuating the village. Despite the danger, he went house to house, helping people to flee. He even personally carried a wounded woman to safety. And when the Germans finally captured the village, he was one of the last people to leave. Stories like these are really inspiring. They remind us that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope. These Polish Home Army soldiers were ordinary people who found themselves in extraordinary circumstances. Yet they rose to the challenge and displayed incredible bravery and determination. They put their own safety aside and helped others in need. They showed us that even in the face of overwhelming odds, we can still stand up for what we believe in and make a difference in the world. So I think it's safe to say that these men were indeed heroes. They were ordinary people who became extraordinary. They didn't fight on the battlefield. They fought for their families, for their friends, for their neighbors. They fought for their country. They didn't need superpowers to become heroes. They didn't need fancy equipment or training. They didn't even need to be soldiers. They were already heroes because they were human beings with a sense of duty and compassion. They were the kind of people who would stand up for what is right, no matter what the cost. So thank you, Polish Home Army soldiers, for showing us what it means to be brave. Thank you for showing us that even in the darkest of times, we can still find hope and inspiration. You may not have won every battle, but you won our admiration and respect. You may not have been superheroes, but you were real-life heroes, and that makes you even more amazing. So now I want to hear from you. What do you think? Do you agree with me that these Polish Home Army soldiers were heroes? Why or why not? Also, if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and share it with your friends. Until next time, thank you for watching. Stay tuned for more amazing stories.